Did you know that international treaties and end-user certificates are the only checks and balances we have to control the arms trade?
The UK alone sells to over 18 countries with human rights concerns. So how are we sure that we control where weapons end up?
I mean, it makes sense. The best way to control where weapons end up is by
not selling them?
But if you are, then having the exporters report exactly where they'll go and whether they are in line with the law is crucial.
So why do we still end up with situations like that of Somalia, where you can buy a British hand grenade for $25 in an open-air market? By the end of this video, we hope that you will learn the 6 reasons that explain why the statement that we can control where weapons end up and how they are used is just a myth.
Let's start with the example that best represents karma: blowbacks.
A blowback happens when an ally that you once sold or provided weapons to becomes an enemy. There are numerous examples of this throughout history. For example, Al-Qaeda was once a US pawn to fight the Soviets in the 1980s. And ISIS, as they grow, get their hands on weapons that are sometimes US made. But really, their arsenal is just like mad international. We're talking Chinese, Russian, French, American, British. It's as simple as that. Once the weapons are sold, we no longer have control over how they will be used. As Henry Kissinger once said, the US has no permanent friends, only interests.
Arms dispersion means that weapons, whether small or massive, end up in places that they were never intended to be.
Let's take Libya as an example of this. Muammar Gaddafi was Libya's leader for over 40 years, and when a wave of social revolutions erupted across North Africa in 2011, Gaddafi basically lost all power. Throughout his dictatorship, he collected an impressive arsenal of various weapons, and his end brought forward every human rights activist's worst nightmare: warehouses filled with unsupervised guns and ammo. From Russia alone, Libya imported more than 2,000 tanks, 2,000 armored fighting vehicles, 350 artillery weapons, dozens of ships, and fleets of aircraft. There was now a power vacuum in one of the most heavily armed ex-dictatorships, with rebel groups seizing any and all weaponry that they could find in warehouses, and no one to regulate or control where or who gets them. They even reached Boko Haram, the Nigerian extremist group that kidnapped hundreds of schoolgirls a few years ago.
Next on the list, deliberate diversion. At the start of this video, we mentioned end-user certificates. Basically, they are government documents used in international transfer of arms and ammunition to certify that whoever is purchasing the arms is the final recipient. These are written by the country that is on the receiving end of the deal. So why do end-user certificates not work? Surprise, surprise, people lie on forms too. There is no international standard for them, so in reality, you could claim that any old form is an end-user certificate. And considering arms dealers are often involved in this process, who knows what's real and what isn't? Another reason is that there's no real obligation for anyone to abide by them. In the end, these certificates, which are what supporters of the arms trade say are proof that this trade is accounted for, are nothing but empty promises.
You can't buy guns from just any store. Well, you basically can in the US, yeah. Due to their Second Amendment right to bear arms and the non-stop lobbying by the National Rifle Association, it's nearly impossible to get rid of the legal sale of military-grade weapons to civilians.
The only real reason as to why they're not sold in British supermarkets is because traditionally they were made for the higher class of society and weren't accessible to your everyday person. There are other countries that have just as much gun violence as the US without the easy access to guns, like Mexico.
In 2013, the Igarapé Institute of Brazil and the Transborder Institute of San Diego found that around 253,000 firearms were moved illegally from the US to Mexico, which were used to supply various cartels. And it's no surprise that the 40% increase in gun crimes and murders that Mexico saw happen in 2011 coincided with the lifting of a ban in the US on gun sales in California, Arizona, and New Mexico, all of which share a border with Mexico.
This is an example of a perfectly legal transfer of arms in the United States that end up in places for which the seller can't account for.
For years before the Rwandan genocide happened in 1994, governments like France had been selling weapons to Rwanda. You see, there were two major ethnic groups fighting for power, the Hutus and the Tutsis. France's president at the time, François Mitterrand, was not with the idea of a potential Tutsi victory in the ongoing civil war. So primary weapons like small arms, light weapons, rocket launchers, and military vehicles were routinely sold and exported to Rwanda for years.
In 1994, the plane of the Hutu president was shot down. The Hutus immediately blamed the Tutsis. What followed, for just a month, was genocide. It's estimated that over 1 million people died in this time, with up to 800,000 of them being Tutsis. While it was being reported in worldwide media as a tribal conflict carried out with machetes, it was actually way worse than that. Because of the weapons that had been bought by the Rwandan government, the military was able to use devastating firepower against unarmed civilians, including children. This was to wipe out the Tutsi bloodlines.
Now, did the French government know that the weapons that they were selling to Rwanda were going to be used in a literal bloodbath that would forever shape the geopolitics and the lives of those in the area? No, but how could they have? We can't predict the future, but we can predict that the myths that sustain the arms trade as a tool for security will be protected by those profiting from it.
This is when international law comes in. It exists in the forms of treaties and agreements signed by countries who are committing themselves to respecting the laws. And when it comes to weapons and their use, there are plenty of treaties in place, like the Arms Trade Treaty. The treaty says that any country who signs it won't be selling weapons if it means furthering conflict and violation of human rights. The treaty also advocates for transparency in the trade and the promotion of human rights at the center of everything it represents.
It's been active since 2014, but guess who hasn't signed it yet? You guessed it, Russia and China, two of the world's largest arms exporters. And signing it isn't the only thing that you have to do in order for the treaty to apply to you. Ratifying the treaty means that after signing it, you go through it and go, if I want to make sure that I can fulfill this bit, I'm going to have to make some changes in my national laws. The US has signed it, but not ratified it. Shocking, I know. But on the other hand, the UK has both signed and ratified this international, legally binding treaty. Yet the UK still hosts one of the world's largest arms fairs, inviting governments that are on the UK's human rights watch list. Surely that does not fit in with the treaty's obligations.
Our politicians know that manufacturing and then exporting weapons to keep the money-making machine at home is a reckless thing to do.
Weapons don't rot, and they don't simply go away. Like it says in the book Indefensible, even the smallest of arms can turn into weapons of mass destruction as they're used again and again and again.
Think of all the things we'd be able to accomplish if we focused on peace innovation and sustainability, instead of looking for the next opportunity to sustain the arms trade and start a war.
Oh, but Dad, the arms industry is a massive part of the economy.
Well, hit that bell, because the next myth we debunk is all about this very argument. In the meantime, get involved with our community. See you in the next video, and remember, we ain't dead yet.
It's so important to try to demilitarize universities. When Julian was studying maths and physics in Australia, he realized that basically staying in academia in those fields meant taking part in research that was basically funded by the military-industrial complex. He wrote an article, which is posted in wikileaks.org, called On the Take and Loving It. And it is precisely about CIA and NSA-funded research to elaborate torture techniques. And perhaps the academics involved didn't even realize what they were doing research in relation to. So they're maybe unwittingly part of a very dark, inhumane process.